All right, we will be starting now. Hi, everyone. My name is Tiwa, and I'm the host for today's Design with EU session. Design with EU is a community for designers, and what we do is we bring on experienced and senior designers to, share their knowledge about some topics to us. And we've been doing this for almost 2 years now, and up we've brought in a lot of experienced and senior designers, and we have a recording of most of our sessions, which is on our YouTube page, right? So after this session, you can head over there and watch a couple of videos, subscribe to our channel, or even save them to watch them later. um Today is also a really, really special session. I'm really excited for it because of the topic and the guests that we have. So I'll just do a brief introduction about Sarah, and she can carry on from there. Sarah is our esteemed speaker, and she's a UX design authority, currently based in Barcelona with over 7 years of experience. She excels in crafting exceptional user experience, prioritizing pixel perfect design quality, and mentoring emerging designers. Um, Sarah's collaborative expertise spans global projects rather with companies like Glovo, um, Senior Internet, MTN, and Charisol. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Beyond her professional achievements, Sarah is a passionate advocate for pushing the boundary of UX design, constantly seeking innovative approaches to solve real world problems. Right. That's like a really, really awesome introduction. Thank you for honoring our invite, Sarah, and you can carry on with the session.
Hi, thank you so much for that introduction. I think it was great. I'm really happy to be here talking about this, and particularly because it's something that designers, no matter whether you're entry level or senior, is something that we always talk about, something that we always try to get better at. We spend a lot of our time working with developers, and so I'm really excited to talk about this and answer questions and just interact with everyone on this topic and just share what I have picked up personally over the last couple of years collaborating with developers. So, again, thank you for inviting me to speak on this topic. And with that, can I get started?
Yes, you can.
Okay, sure. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So when I remember when I first saw this topic, I was just thinking like, what would be the best way to share what knowledge I have about collaborating with developers in a session like this. And what I decided to do was break this into just a three parts talk, which the first one is just going to be touching on best practices when collaborating with developers. The second one is going to be highlighting those places in the product design journey where we actually collaborate with developers. And the third one is just going to be looking at our handover file, the moment where we're transferring the finished design to developers, what elements we actually include. So I see collaboration with developers in three ways. We collaborate with them before we ever design any pixel, during the design, and after the design. So it's very important to think of these three phases and the best practices that would work for each of these phases, which we'll see in a couple of minutes. So the first practice to keep in mind is kind of like a disclaimer, which is there's no one size fits all approach to developer handoff. Having worked in different companies over the last 7 years, every developer handover process that I've had has been different. So it's very important based off the factors you have, the kind of design work you do, the kind of engineers you have, whether you're working with a full stack engineer, front end and back end split, just your company structure. But what we can do is when we're working closely with these engineers is to communicate with them regularly and actually try to find solutions to make their lives easier, our lives easier, and just the process of design to development very smooth. So the one thing to help you build that perfect approach wherever you are with developers is by talking to them. Just as we would talk to users, it's very important to communicate with our engineers. And we're communicating with them, not just presenting our designs to them and saying, here's the finished design, go and work on it. It's to understand what are actually their needs in this process. How do they read our file? How do they find things? Are they familiar with Figma? You'll be surprised how many times a developer has messaged me to help them export an image, which is something that they can do themselves. So it's important for us to talk to them and understand their needs when it comes to collaborating with UX designers. Another best practice would be sharing rationales. So we know that when we design, oftentimes maybe we started out with an original idea and we changed the idea, or we decided to go with a particular design because of a particular reason. I find it very useful to document these decisions in Figma in a design deck and leave the links to these pages within the handoff file. So not every developer might read it, but I often hear from the senior developers in my team that they want to kind of dig into what I was thinking while I worked on the design or while I came up with a certain strategy or decided to use a certain component. And they're actually learning how we think about building products from reading our design insights or why we decide to make these decisions. So it's very important to share your rationales with developers so that they can understand your mindset when you were designing something. The next thing that I think is very important is encouraging them to use Figma's commenting feature. This may seem very simple, but it actually is not. Sometimes you get a lot of pings on Slack or WhatsApp or email or whatever communication channel your company is using, and then someone is asking you about a design and you have absolutely no context to what they're talking about. You don't know what they're pointing at, you don't know what they're saying. So because it's common for them to have questions about design, to make it easier for everyone involved, you can actually request that they leave comments directly in Figma instead of sending you outside external messages. This way, the comments are visible for everyone and it provides context for the issue that they may be having at that time. Moving on to the next thing in Figma is also version control. So it's also very important, I've seen, that you ensure in your developer handoff file is your single source of truth. So what do I mean by this? Design is constantly iterating. You get feedback from your boss, feedback from design feedback sessions, and you make changes. If you make any changes, it's very important to update your handoff file, which is your page in Figma directly. This will prevent confusion
I'm
or
sorry. Hi, Sarah.
yeah,
Um, so I was trying to confirm before, letting you know your screen is not clear.
you can't see what I'm showing.
Yeah, and then a couple of people have, said
Okay,
that.
let me present again. Let me know if you can see it now because I'm sharing.
Still blurry.
Lorraine. Still blurry?
Yes. Someone else should please confirm that, in the chat, so it's not just me.
I don't know what to do about the blur. I'm sharing.
Okay, someone just confirmed that it's still blurry.
That's interesting. 1 minute. Let me know if it's clearer.
Yes, it's clearer than it was before. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I remember, I think I was talking about version control, right? So I
Yes.
was saying that when you make any changes in your design as a designer, it's very important that you keep a particular page as the single source of truth. So even if you get changes later down the line when you showed a lot of people, always make sure that your particular file that you've termed handoff or ready for development is the single source of truth. You want to prevent confusion, and you want to avoid pointing developers to different pages in Figma. I've seen this happen where even I am trying to find a final version of a design in a company, and I get sent a lot of different links and a lot of different frames, and there's no single source of truth. And if this is confusing for me as a designer, imagine a developer who does not interact with Figma as much as us. So it's very important to have a single source of truth and keep it updated with your latest design. If you have access to the branching feature in Figma, it can be highly beneficial to utilize it. So I think this branching comes when if you're working in a company that has a team plan, you can actually create branches of your design and create different versions from version 0 to version 1.2, or as many versions as you have. And then that helps you also keep your design as a source of truth. But if you don't, and you're using regular Figma, then the file that you have ready for dev should always be your source of truth. And next thing I would say is also about structuring our pages. I get a lot of feedback from developers that sometimes they're confused because when we hand over a project to them, the first time the designs are stored in a file called designs. The next time the designs are stored in a file called UX work. The next time it's stored in a file called something else. So it's very important to actually have a Figma page structure, right? And this is mine, what I'm actually displaying, where I keep my research different from work in progress, and I keep components separate. I have an archive where things that I don't use just lives there. And then I have a final ready for development page. And so the developers I work with know that that ready for dev page is the absolute final up-to-date design. And that's the only place they need to concern themselves with finding any information that they need to work with. Right. So more best practices. We spoke about structuring your Figma file, but it's also very important that you structure the work on your Figma canvas. So structuring your frames. This might be when you put your frames side by side, just giving each of them a tag, or using a header to kind of break apart the screens you have on your Figma and letting the developers know what they are. Oh, this is for registration, this is for onboarding, this is for this is for that. It actually helps them, especially when you have a very complex project, to be able to streamline the information so people know what a set of screens are, what its purpose and what it's used for. Another thing that's very important that I've heard from developers is they like prototypes because prototypes help them with the interaction design and they understand how things interact. But oftentimes it doesn't show them the big picture. So also considering doing screen flows is very useful. So taking your final design and actually laying it out and using arrows to show how things interact. If this is something that's maybe cause you a lot of stress, maybe you can negotiate with your developers to not do that. But I've gotten a lot of feedback from developers that they like to see a map of the final design and see how things interact. Now, something that I found very useful in the last 2 years as well when collaborating with developers is you can say something once in a meeting and you repeat yourself in two subsequent meetings after, right? And one way that I found to curb repeating or over explaining something that I've done over and over again is utilizing Loom. So in most of my files with developers, I will add a Loom video. And this is very handy because you only need to record it once. And then you can actually share this with anyone interested in the details of your design. So for every design handoff, I always record a video walking them through the design. If it's a complicated project, I would maybe do it in person, where we would all hop on a call and I would walk them through the design. If it's a small to medium project, I just record a video walking them through the designs, and I leave that video link on the Figma file, and it's something that they can play as many times as needed without even disturbing me or asking me more questions. Even for complicated designs, I also still record the video, not just also for developers, but any other interested stakeholder who wants to know what they are looking at, where it came from, and how it actually works. For more complicated components, I typically would also do a video on a particular component, speaking about maybe something I newly added into our design system, for example, explaining to them why we added it to the design system, how it's going to be used, and just any information I think is important. So Loom definitely was a game changer for me in the last 2 years. Another best practice that I think is very, very useful is change logs. So if even if you are keeping your final designs in a page called ready for development, that typically comes when you are at the last point of you handing off your work to developers. But sometimes I've been in situations whereby I would design something and then there's maybe like a small change, not really a big change, and the product manager and developers just want us to keep these versions so that they can implement one and then in the next sprint implement the next one, right? So in things like that, I would typically have maybe the same design on one file, but I would put a change log to say, okay, so this was version 1.0, and now in version 2, this is the change log. We changed the menu bar, we changed the primary color, we changed this. And I would also attach this Loom video to this change note, right? And it helps them be able to understand the difference between versions that we had designed or that they are going to design in an agile way. They understand what is changing sprint by sprint. So it's very important to include this change log if you have this kind of situation in your design organization, so they understand the changes being made to the design. Okay. And I think I've touched on the most important best practices to keep in mind. So now I'm going to be moving on to collaboration. So when it comes to collaboration, I've tried to highlight here where I believe are the touch points that designers and developers actually meet in this product development or UX design process. And this is something that is actually my day-to-day or my month-to-month, no matter the feature or the project I'm working on. These are the places where I collaborate with developers the most. So the first would be in the discovery stage where we're understanding the problem. Collaboration with developers here is key because I invite them to my project kickoff. So when I kick off the project and I invite the PM, the engineer, whoever needs to be in that meeting, because we're just talking about the problem from the initial stage, we're talking about, what might be the minimum viable product, we're talking about whatever we might need to move forward. It's key to have the engineer there. Typically in the past, I've seen situations whereby we only bring the engineer on when there's a design to be handed over. And the problem with that is then you spend a lot of time explaining the project, explaining maybe things that have gone on in the whole ideation process. So it's very important, if possible, to have your engineers in your discovery phase. This also helps you in your design because from this discovery phase, I typically have an output of low fidelity user flows. And from those low fidelity user flows, the engineers can already see it and tell me, Sarah, this is going to work, or Sarah, this is not going to work. So essentially from that very first early stage, I get to see my technical limitations. I get to see what is feasible. I get to see what is not feasible. And that really helps me when I'm now carrying a potential solution to high fidelity. The next stage will actually be the creation phase. So it's important to have engineers here as well because typically here, maybe I've designed something that is mid fidelity, not final fidelity. And I've added a bit of interaction and I'm sharing it with the team, I'm sharing it with the stakeholders. And here collaborating with engineers is they will actually now see they will actually be able to tell me the technical efforts maybe of the interactions that I'm proposing. or the technical effort of implementing a particular strategy or a particular use case that I'm presenting to them. So from this, I'm able to assess the technical risk with them. I'm able to define all the parts and use cases so they understand everything that they need to do. And I'm also able to share my design rationale with them so that they understand why I feel that we should design something a certain way. And they can challenge me. And oftentimes when we have this back and forth, I'm able to see things from their point of view and my point of view, and we are able to meet in the middle because we have context coming from the discovery phase to the creation phase. The third place that I see us collaborating with developers a lot is the final design. So in the final designs, when I'm actually trying to now seek final checks, final validation with the design team and stakeholders, engineers are very, very important here because they give me feedback. They say, yes, we've seen these designs from low fidelity, we've seen it from mid fidelity, now we're seeing it in high fidelity, and we're completely aligned. This is the moment where they can tell me we're aligned, we can definitely implement everything and it's good to go. Or this is the moment where when they see the final solution, they say, we cannot implement all of this right now. Let us consider breaking this design into two phases. And then I know that I have to go back, speak with the product manager and see how we break down design into maybe a version 1 release or a version 2 release. Or if the developers say everything is fine, then we push forward. So this is a very important point for us to collaborate with engineers. Next will be the delivery phase. So at this point, this is where we have our design to developer handshake meeting. And this is where we have the feature or design walkthroughs where we invite developers and we're showing them the finalized design. If it's complex, walking them through what has been designed. Here again, it's an opportunity for them to see a lot of screens, a lot more interactions, give as much feedback as possible, confirm that they are completely aligned with everything that we're doing. And at that point is where I hand over the ready for development file to the engineering team. After handing off that file to the engineering team, we have the last touch points, which is when it's actually implemented. So at this point, the developers have gone, and it is now my concern that to ensure that we have pixel perfect deliverables, to see the matching of what I give the developers and what they've actually brought to life. So here I'm collaborating with them, trying to make sure that the feature or the design looks and performs as expected in all different screens, devices, languages, browsers. And what I see that is helpful here with the implemented design is not just also having the engineer send you a file. It's actually getting on a call and having them do a live demo. And typically in that live demo, I'm able to ask them questions in the moment. They can explain. I'm able to show and contrast something that maybe they did wrong with something that they've implemented that doesn't just match up. And we're able to resolve a lot of these mismatches on the call. That is kind of like the last point where I do final checks and collaboration with a particular feature or project with the developers. It's also where you can bash a lot of bugs, identify a lot of things. And so I think it's very, very useful to have this when collaborating with developers. And the last part of our agenda is talking about what we actually put in our handover file. So for that, I'm going to have to open a different file. While I'm opening that file, if we have any questions about the best practices or the stages where I've highlighted that we can collaborate, you can also ask me and I'll be happy to answer.
Timothy, yes, you can speak.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much so far, Sarah. It's been very insightful. I do want you to expound more on the change logs. That's like one place where I have problem. I really want to keep and monitor the changes that are happening in a file at the same time, and so things just don't get misplaced. I really want you to expand a lot on change logs and how you use it. If you can do something practical, I'd love to see it.
Yeah, sure. No problem. Let's see
Yeah, thank you.
what I can do about that. Right. So what I try to do with change logs is just to keep track of the design changes that I have in particular flows. So don't have any flows right now. So let's pretend these are actually screens because I'm just trying to explain the theory. So in theory, when I have a set of screens, I will have a change log by the side where I write out um, anything that has happened. So I have a set of screens and then I've gone back to my team, I've done some design validation, and now we've changed a button and we've changed an arrow. Typically what I like to do is go to those screens, that whole flow. I keep the flow on the right, I have the change log on the left, and I actually write out change log, I write the dates, and I say we've changed the primary component, button component to secondary button. We've changed the arrow from um, arrow right to circle arrow left. That's something I would do. Now, in that same file, if next week I have another set of changes, I would duplicate those flows again, and then I would highlight what has changed. So now maybe we've changed an entire component. Maybe we were using cards and we decided to use list. I would write it change log 2.0. For that change, um, cards changed to list, right? And I try to make sure that I'm arranging them from top to bottom. So the most recent changes at the top and the old changes at the bottom. And so how this helps my developers is they come and they're able to see what has changed throughout the product design process. So they're already carried along for the beginning. So nothing is actually a surprise to them, but it's important to them to see the decisions that were made along the way, particularly because when they see these change logs and the screens that the change log corresponds to, they can come and comment and say, okay, I see that we've changed this from grid to carousel, but looking at change log 1.0, I really think that we in this particular sprint, we can only implement cards, we cannot implement lists. And then we have a conversation based off that. And based off that conversation, maybe we have a meeting, and based off that meeting, I'm able to have again another change log, right? Where I now come and say, okay, we've decided that change log 3.0 changed lists back to cards. And maybe sometimes I put some context due to technical feasibility, we've changed the list back to cards. And it's important to note that this whole change log process is only during the design when things are very mid fidelity. When it comes to the ready for dev, anything that is in ready for dev is like final changes. So even in that ready for dev file where I've put the screens that are final changes, if something changes there, I may have a different page, take the change log, make the changes, write what I changed, but then I move the final designs still back to that ready to dev file. So they know that anything in that particular file is final changes. They don't need to track a change log there because that is the most up-to-date design. So this concept of having the screens and documenting the changes that were made is typically in the ongoing mid-fidelity stage where things are still being audited, feedback is still being given. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you. I do have one concern though. I
Sure.
think this will be the last question. So we can continue with the class. Um, I do this a lot of times. I duplicate and duplicate, but I do find out that it's usually heavy on my Figma file. Then I start getting warnings and warnings and warnings, even if it's premium, you know. Is there any special way you handle that? I do get this by the layer side where it says the storage is something happens to storage. I can't remember the exact error message. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I definitely know what you're talking about. So right now for me, the way I handle change logs might be a bit different because I actually use Figma branches. And that means that within a particular Figma file, I create a branch and it opens a different page, page, and I have more of a canvas to keep those changes. But in projects that are not when I have projects like that where I don't have access to an enterprise Figma plan, and I have this kind of situation that you just explained come up, another thing that I do is keep the original set of flows. So typically, to reduce space, I might just keep the original set of flows somewhere, and then I only document a particular change, right? So I will only take the screens or the couple of screens that have a change and highlight that. And then I would link in the change log, maybe the original flow, if someone wants to see how the thing looks all together. I remember I was doing that a lot when I was having this like storage problem. So that was what I did.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. Any questions again about best practices or the touch points process before I move to the last section? No?
We don't have any hands raised, so you can just continue.
Okay, awesome. I can't see the hands, that's why I keep asking. All right.
No problem.
So the last part of this section is what happens when we've gone through that 6-part process. We've collaborated with the developers from discovery to creation to design validation to implementation. We've checked the design, and we are at the point where we now have to hand over the file to the developers to implement. Again, like I said, it's very important to remember those first best practices that I was talking about. Maybe in your company, they don't have a culture of a handover process that requires a particular meeting. That might mean that because you understand how important having a handover process is, you utilize some of the other best practices I was talking about, like recording your handover process via Loom, right? So even if the engineer say, I don't have time for you to walk me through this file, just send me the design. It's good for you to record that video, explain as much as possible, and send it to them, because you really want to optimize your design process. You don't want to be having redundant meetings down the line, or somebody implementing something because they didn't understand what you were trying to transmit. So just as I was saying before, there's no perfect process. What collaboration with your developers is about is just about asking them, communicating with them. What part of Figma is hard for you? Explain it to them. And this is the process that I want to implement. Explain it to them, and then you and the developer will actually come up with a process that helps you collaborate more effectively. That being said, the reason why I spoke about that was actually sitting down with my developers and asking them questions is how I started to understand what I needed to include in my handover file with them. Before, I would just make a lot of assumptions, and I would say, okay, I just need to draw to keep the high fidelity screens, keep the components, keep a prototype, send it to them, and that's it. And that was what I used to do. And then I started to see some inconsistencies or just endless questions or just things. And what I did was that I actually had a meeting with them, and I sat down and I asked them, explain to me, what do you expect? What do you need? What is going to make sense for collaborating with you? And based off that, I was able to gather a lot of things from them. And for me, I was able to separate the things I needed to have in my handover file into must-haves, which is I must have them, nice to have, which is if I have the time, I will add them, and then things that are just fine. Like I decide if it's useful or if I can add value to them somehow. So the things that I must have are component behavior, corner cases, devices, interactions, light and dark modes, which is applicable to me because I work on a product that has different modes, dev mode documentation. And then nice to have version updates, links to the design system elements, Lottie files, logic and UX notes. And then fine is just things that I feel that are resources that might buttress the point of why I'm trying to have us go a certain direction or use it or do a certain transition or interaction or things like that. So when it comes to must to have, it was important to the developers that they saw component behavior. They want to see states. What is the default, active, selected, disabled, or empty state? The behavior of the component. What is the character limitation? How many text lines? How does this scale? Interaction states, and how do you want us to interact on the application? Do you have a particular transition that you prefer? What is the feedback that we give when a user interacts with the components? Are there any animations? And then before, there used to be specs where I used to actually like highlight the margin space and padding space. But thanks to Figma's new dev mode, we don't need to do that manually by ourselves anymore. And this is an example of what I mean when in my handover file, when I use a component and I show the developer the different states. So this is actually a text box, and I would show them the default states. I would show them what it was when it's active, and I would show them the behavior. The fact that this is the minimum height, and they need to keep to a certain character limitation, and the behavior when there's a lot of text. Typically, they also would really like to see the transition of a component. So I would typically show them how something works with a prototype, or honestly, sometimes just laying it out for them, how something moves a certain way. Another thing that was a must for them in my handover file was corner cases. So I see sometimes in handover files that you could, as a designer, you could be making a huge mistake if you're only showing the happy part, right? So they want to see the successful flow, but then it's very important for us to cover all different kind of flows. So we have our error states, the empty states, error feedback, and even positive feedback. They want to understand what should happen in these particular use cases. So typically I would show them, for example, this is an example of a user actually rating an order on the app. And if they rate an order, I'm showing the developers that if the both ratings are positive, we show this snack bar. If one is negative, we show a bottom sheet. If the courier is negative, we show this. If the food is negative, we show that. And it's very important for them to see that empty states are empty states. It's important for us to provide this to the developers as well. Next would be a must. So for them, it was important for them to see me lay out my design on popular breakpoints. And for me, I use the iPhone 13 mini, an Android phone. For medium size, I use the iPhone 8, and for smaller size, I use iPhone SE. This is not general. This is something that is very specific to the product that I work on. And so I identified these sizes for the developers. And typically, I would lay out if I use a particular component, like what I'm showing, they would like to see how it interacts on these different sizes. And so I would lay it out on these different device sizes for them to see how this component works. The next would be interactions. So they want to see transitions, they want to see the flow, they want to see any animations, and they want to see any loaders or skeletons that we want to put in the process. So sometimes I would actually animate my screen or my components not in Figma but in Protopie, and provide them a video for how the transition would work, just because Protopie has just more ways for me to tweak a particular transition. And then I would provide things to them, such as skeletons and loaders. So it was important for us to have this because we want to avoid user drop-off. So instead of just showing some random illustration for every design, I would make a skeleton low fidelity version of that component and provide it to them. So this is something that fades in before the design is actually shown. The developers, like I said, when it comes to transitions, it's very helpful for them to see how things interact. And we know this, so you can do this with prototypes and also explaining to them how things should fade in and fade out. A must for them, or a must for anyone if you're working in a product that has different modes, is also seeing your design in different modes. I always do this in my handover files for them to see how the components we have in our design system work on light and dark and how they should be implemented. Another must now, which is really, really new, is with Figma's dev mode documentation. So going back to the collaborating and communicating with your developers, when Figma released the dev mode, a lot of us designers were very excited about this because it just enhanced our collaboration with developers to the next level. And so I sat down with my developers and I explained to them how dev mode works and how it was going to be working in my Figma files moving forward. And what this means is when now they know how to use dev mode, so they go to my Figma files and I no longer have to manually draw out margins and paddings for them. They can actually see this using the dev mode as shown here. And when they click a component, they can read the purpose of the component. They can open the component playground that Figma now has and see how this component changes across light mode, dark mode, 2 different types, 3 different types. Say it's a list, so they're able to just see how the component moves and changes. And so this has been very important in my collaboration with developers now. Then we come to the nice to haves, and these are things that maybe I will add if I have time. So in my nice to have, I actually have the version updates because this file is already a ready to dev file. So oftentimes I may not put like a version note there, but if there's for any reason that in that ready to dev file something happens that is even a small change, I might put a note that just says, oh, this button was updated from this color to another color. But typically I've already spoken to my developers and they know that everything in that file is final, so no need to track any changes in that particular page. Next thing I would put if I have time is linking them to the basic design system. So because we keep the components separate from our design files, sometimes developers say when we build new components that they don't know where the main design system is and a lot of things. So if I have time, I would always link them to the main component or to the design system or to the main component, the new component I created that is now housed in the design system, so they can go there and see how it works. Another thing that I would add is Lottie files. We typically use a lot of Lottie files sometimes for animations or references for how we want something to transition or work. And in times like this, if I have time, if it's something I didn't already explain to them on the call, I would add a link to Lottie files that could explain a particular transition or a particular way I want something to work to them. And I might even create a Lottie file myself and link that Lottie file for them to download, maybe a particular animated icon or illustration or something like that. Another thing that is very nice to have is logic and UX notes. Typically, the logic of the project, with the UX strategy or how the project is going to work, should be defined in your product requirements document, which is maintained and owned by the product manager. But you can also add it in dev notes. So sometimes, for example, I explain to them that certain logic, like if a user has less than 10 orders, only show this, or if there is no product rating, only show that. Or sometimes I add UX notes for them to explain to them that if we detect a particular scenario, then we're going to do this, or we're going to pull this, or we're going to pull that. And like I said, typically this is already outlined in your product requirement documents, but you can include this in your dev notes for developers. They find it quite helpful. And yeah, I've come to the end of my presentation. If there's any questions about any of these elements, please let me know and I'll be happy to talk about it.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for this session. It was really nice. I have a question here. So this person is asking, are there any? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Are there any particular soft skills or interpersonal qualities that you believe are crucial for UI UX designers and developers to work together effectively as a team?
Yeah, of course. I think one of the most important interpersonal soft skills, or two of the most important interpersonal soft skills, is listening, right? So one is listening. Oftentimes we can prescribe something for the developers, or the developers can prescribe something for us, or make decisions for us, or we make decisions for them, and we're not actually listening to what they actually need. So a very good soft skill is, if you ask something of a developer, listen to them so you can actually hear their challenges and you know what to do. The same way they should be able to listen to you to understand where you're coming from a design point of view. So listening will be the first soft skill. Second one, of course, is communication. Even if it comes to a point where you're collaborating with a developer and there's some sort of friction, it's important to collaborate effectively. So you're not collaborating effectively if you're throwing an argument. You're collaborating effectively if you're backing up your decision with data, you're backing up your decision with design UX principles or rationales, or you're backing up your communication to them when there's a friction with data, and not with your personal bias or personal feelings. And that's why, again, just to go back to what I spoke about in the beginning, typically I've seen that friction between designers and developers happen only when developers are added at the end of the process, when we just call them and then there's a design file and the design is finalized and we say, here's the design, go and implement it. That's where oftentimes you see a lot of friction, and then they come back and then there's a lot of back and forth. But if you make sure to carry these developers from the beginning, they actually even contribute to the ideation of the product. They are seeing that their feedback is being valued, and maybe they're even giving really valuable feedback that you can implement in your design. You typically would not have any problems towards the ending of your process because they were part of it from the beginning. So the soft skills, I would say, is listening and communication.
All right, thank you so much. There's one last question here. Um, so this person is asking. Sorry, I'm trying to look for the question. Okay, what role does user testing play in the collaboration between designers and developers, and how can insights from user testing be seamlessly integrated into development processes?
Well, that's interesting. When it comes to our own UX design process, user testing could happen in different ways, right? Sometimes you do user testing even before you hand over to the developer. So if you do user testing on your prototype or just your design screens, how it affects the developers is that from that user testing, if you have any valuable feedback, you will add it to your design, right? And you communicate to them that the design has been updated because we tested the design and we got a lot of feedback, and that's why we're changing this. And then that one is just information. But if it's a point where you're doing user testing on implemented design, so the things that the engineers have already implemented, and you're doing your user test, it's still kind of up to you as a designer to make sure you look at the data from that user test and actually turn it into valuable information, actionable information that, oh, I have to change something, or we have to change something. And that's actionable information you're getting from your user test. It could be two types of insights. It could be design insights, meaning the user test has shown you that something needs to be redesigned or better designed. Or it could be engineering insights, which is, this is just a bug, it's not working. And then you're giving that as feedback to the developers that, hey, from our user testing of this implemented feature, this are not working. The loading is too slow. So people are tired of waiting on this screen and they drop off. And that's not something that's design related, that's engineering related. So they have to scale up the system. Or there's a bug, or there's something that is from a technical place that they need to fix. User testing being added to your product development process will help designers and engineers, because it will expose engineering or technical flaws that they need to fix, and it may also expose design inconsistencies or design iterations that the designer needs to make. So in terms of, I don't know if the question was how important. If it was how important, yes, it's very important and it's very useful to both the designer and the developer.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That answers that question. Someone else is asking in the chat here, from your experience, how do you find that the means at which you collaborate vary from developer to developer?
Again, going back to what I said in the beginning, that there's no one size fits all process, right? There's only best practices, and these best practices come from people who have done things that worked for them, and then just like I'm sharing and hoping that it will work for your own process. But it's very your design to developer collaboration process or relationship is very dependent on you, your developer, and whatever kind of company structure you have. If you have a company structure that has ways of working, I've seen that collaboration with developers in companies where there's a defined ways of working is good and is better because they know that there's a process we need to follow and the process is well written. So it accommodates the fact that developers need to be part of the discovery process, part of the design review, and they need to be open to feedback from user testing and all of that. So you're literally just collaborating with them based off a standard operating procedure of your company. And in that case, everything works seamlessly. But when you're working with a client and the person has hired developers, or you're working in an organization that is not so structured and doesn't have these ways of working, I found that you have to be proactive as a designer to say, I'm here, I'm trying to make us work better. And because of that, I want to understand what you need. And hopefully, if you have a good developer, they will understand, you will listen to them, which where the listening part comes again. And then from listening to them, you will know what you can do to make your collaboration with them easier. If you don't listen to them, if they don't listen to you, then I mean, that's a totally different question, right? But yeah, so it varies for me when I've worked in places that have structure and places where they didn't have structure. Where there was structure, collaboration was easier. Where there was no structure, I had to implement the structure. And so that means trying to get them to understand why this collaboration and processes and having them involved in the beginning of the design was important. And yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Sarah. I hope your question was answered, Precious. So, one last thing before we end, can people reach out to you on social media?
Yes, sure. I am very active on LinkedIn and typically respond to all my DMs. So if you have a question, shoot me a LinkedIn DM and I will respond to you.
All right. Thank you, because we're sending like links to your social in the chat now. So if you want to reach out to Sarah, you can do that there. Thank you so much, Sarah, for honoring our invite. Really appreciate, and the session was really, really insightful, and I learned a lot, and I'm sure that everyone did.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I saw a question or a comment from Solomon that said, is it possible to have access to the file you used in taking the session? Sure. I will share it with the host and
Yeah.
yeah, you can share it with anyone.
Thank you very much. The recording to this session will be on our YouTube channel during the week. You'll be uploaded during the week, so you can just go to our YouTube channel, subscribe, turn on your post notification so that you get a notification when we post the recording. The links to the files that she used to explain will also be there. We'll be getting it from her. Thank you guys for joining this session. For those joining us for the first time, we have these sessions every Sunday by 8 o'clock, and you can follow us on our social media. The links to that is in the chat to get notification on who we're bringing, what topic we'll be speaking about, and all of those information. Thank you guys for joining. We really appreciate, and we'll see you guys next Sunday. Bye.